Untitled Chapter.
Hi guys, good evening. We're going to start the webinar in exactly 5 minutes, just waiting for the others to log in. Quick sound check. So if you're able to hear me, I think everything is fine. I'll also be sharing my screen in a while. So let me know if you're able to see my screen, all right? Good evening again. We'll be starting the webinar in exactly 4 minutes. Guys, a quick update. We've had a lot of registrations for this webinar. So if you face some problems logging into the webinar, or you see that the audio and video is paused for a while, we've also streamed this webinar live on YouTube. So you can directly go to the YouTube channel, and you can the Crackverbal YouTube channel, and then you can look at the webinar there also. All right. So if you face any problems logging in, or you're logged out, just make sure you go to the YouTube channel quickly and continue watching the webinar. For those who have logged in, guys, we'll be starting in exactly 3 minutes time, right? Just waiting for all the others to join in. Jomon, I would like to think it's for both, but I would say it's more tuned towards people who have started their prep, right? Because I'm going to deal with, what it takes to score a 51. I'm going to analyze a couple of VSR reports, and I'm going to give you like some advice on what are the things you take care of while you solve questions. Okay, so there might be around 5 to 6 questions that I'm solving, but it's more about, it's more for people who are in the first and the second phase of prep, and not the last phase. All right. And Deepanjan saw some questions on probability and permutations and combinations. What we'll do, right? Maybe later in a couple of weeks' time, I will choose a topic which is very concept specific. So in that time, we'll speak about the concept of probability, permutations, and combinations. Okay. So see, I can take. Yeah, definitely, Rajat. So the agenda for today's webinar is the first 10 minutes. I'm going to speak about, I'm going to actually show you and discuss a couple of pointers on a 51 scorer's ESR. I'm also going to show you an ESR of a person who scored 50 in quant, give you some pointers on how you need to go about your prep. And based on my experience and based on the conversations that we've had with students who scored 51 on quant, we've made a set of points, right, that they've given us feedback of what they did right during test day and during their prep. So we've collated all those points, and what I've done with those points is I've chosen a question, a specific question, to illustrate why they've made that point. Okay, so it's going to be more of a analysis sort of strategy webinar. Okay, so there should be a take back for all people in the beginning of their prep as well as in the mid of their prep. All right. Yes, Shikhar, I will, answer all those questions once I show you the ESR, okay? Because I don't want to speculate on this. I will actually show you why I'm telling you that this many questions is what you need to get right by showing you an ESR of a quant 51 score. And I'll show you the difference between a 51 and also a 50 on quant, all right? All right, guys, so we'll kickstart the webinar. Just a quick check. I've shared my screen with you. So the first slide that should be visible to you is how to score 51 in the quant section on the GMAT. So if all of you all are able to see the screen, we can start the webinar. Just a couple of ground rules before we continue. Like I said, right, we want to keep this session as organized as possible. So any responses that you have or any questions you have, please type it in the chat window. And wait for me to finish my explanation to a question before you ask me some questions on that. All right, because it's easier for me to finish my entire explanation and then cater to all the doubts. I'll do my best to cater to all doubts that are there in the chat window. If I miss out on one or two because the chats are continuous, please forgive me for that. Right. And also, if there's a lag of over 10 seconds, please make sure you ping me in the chat window, quickly log out and log in. If you're facing issues for logging in today, then quickly go to the YouTube channel and have a look at the webinar from there. So like I said, right, the agenda for the session is I'm going to analyze an ESR, tell you what is required to score a 51 and 50, right, and the difference between the two. The webinar may go for 90 minutes, but it may extend if you have a lot of questions. So approximately keep yourself free for the next 2 hours. And a quick, overview about Crack Verbal for those who are not students of ours. We founded in 2006. We've have almost 6,000 students who have, taken classes with us and have gone and taken their MBA in different universities. And we also cater to students from different countries, right? So we don't do only classroom coaching, we do personal tutoring, and we also take online sessions. Just for the people out there, for our own classroom students, and for the people who are new to the GMAT, we have a lot of free resources online. Please go to our website, look at the free resources. The link is right below here, right? So you'll be sent a PDF of this, slides once the webinar is done. So you can use that link directly from there. We have a very, very good introduction to data sufficiency. So people who are starting off GMAT and have small trouble with data sufficiencies, right? You can directly go and look at the free videos. It's approximately 5 hours of free videos that are available on our website. We also have a lot of ebooks that you can download from our website, right? Especially people in the last phase of their prep, looking at college, looking at different colleges, people in the first phase of the prep, thinking about whether to take the CAT or the GMAT, right? And people in the middle of the prep looking at, learning sentence correction concepts, some harder sentence correction questions. You have ebooks also that is written by all the faculty here. And finally, our strategy videos are all uploaded on a YouTube channel. Please make sure to go to the YouTube channel and have a look at them. very, very useful in terms of your prep. All right. So let's get started with the agenda for today's session. Like I said, I'm going to analyze an ESR. For those who don't know what an ESR is, an ESR is an enhanced score report, right? So what happens once you take the GMAT, whether you accept the score or reject your score, you have an option to go onto the mba.com website, log in with your login ID and password, and you can make a payment around $25 to $28, and you can download the enhanced score report. So what the enhanced score report is it's a breakdown of how your test went. It would give you percentile rankings for sentence correction, critical reasoning, RC for verbal, and for data sufficiency and problem solving for quant, and also for algebra, arithmetic, and geometry. It also tells you how many mistakes you made in the first 10 questions, next 10 questions, next 10 questions. It also gives you information about what levels of questions you answered right and what levels of questions you answered wrong. Okay, so this ESR is very, very important one. It's going to help people who are starting their prep to understand how the percentile scales work on the quant section, because the percentiles on the quant section is little more sensitive than the percentiles on the verbal section. And it's also going to help people who are retakers, because once you know that I can download an ESR, you can quickly download the ESR, have a look at all the percentile rankings that you have in each section, and you can do very, very focused prep, right? So I'm moving on to the next slide, and I want all of you all to have a look at this next slide. And this is from a recent Quant 51 scorer who had taken classes here at Crack Verbal. Okay, so I requested him specifically to send in his ESR to me, and I've utilized this for this webinar. So like you see, right, 51, that's the maximum you can score on quant. 51 represents the 96th percentile currently, right? And the mean score is 39.4, which is the 37th percentile. In the quant section, the 50th percentile is a score of 43, right? So 43 out of 51 on quant only represents a 50th percentile. And you see below here, we have a breakup in terms of percentile ranks of problem solving and data sufficiency, and also in terms of arithmetic and algebra. So you see where he's lost a couple of points. The area he's lost a couple of points is on the problem solving section, and obviously the problem solving with algebra or geometry involved. We are actually we analyze a lot of ESRs, and one prevalent thing that we've noticed is that many students who get in the range of 49, 50 scores on the GMAT, right? It's really weird that the problem solving section always is at a lower percentile compared to the data sufficiency section. Because what happens in the problem solving section is you're prone to making silly errors, right? One or two calculations go out here and there. You're going to pick up an answer choice which is not the right answer choice, and the GMAT doesn't make things easier for you by putting in the answer choices in such a way that if you make a particular mistake, you're going to pick that answer choice, right? Data sufficiency is more kinder that way, because what happens with data sufficiency is you don't actually need to solve for the entire question. So when you don't have to solve for the entire question, what happens is you're only working up to an extent that you say a statement is sufficient or not, right? Now coming to the more important part of the ESR, right? Obviously, no, they don't share the question, Shikhar, at all. Okay. Prithvi, yes, it may be useful to you because it will illustrate a couple of traps, right? So just hold on for the second part of the webinar where I discuss certain questions, all right? Now, the second bit is what is important. So this is the performance progression chart of the person who got a 51 on quant, okay? Now, what this ESR tells you is this is broken down into sets of 4 sections: the first, the second, the third, and the last. And based on our calculations and based on our experience on how to analyze the ESR, Whenever you have a section which 29%, you see the section in pink here gives you the number of questions he's answered incorrectly. And the sections in blue here tells you how many questions he answered correct. And you see in the second section here, he's answered 71% of the questions right and 29% of the questions wrong. And remember, the ESR is always giving you data on only the questions that were counted towards your score. Okay, it doesn't give you data on the experimental questions. So this 29%, if you calculate based on the sections here, represents 2 mistakes. So it's safe to say, if you want to score a 51 on quant, you can only afford 2 errors. And those 2 errors have to be errors on the harder levels of questions. You cannot afford 2 silly errors then, because you need to understand that your entire score is based on the number of questions you get right or wrong. And it's also based on the difficulty levels of questions you get right or wrong. Right? So if you make 2 silly errors on the easier set of questions, you're going to be penalized slightly. But what's happened here for a 51 is the student has made only 2 mistakes in his entire 31 question set, right, to get a 51. So it's safe to say in present scenarios, 2 mistakes is what you can afford to get a 51 on the quant section. Okay with this, guys? Shikhar, the percentage is split up as 10, 9, 9, and 9. That's what it was previously. Now, since the questions are reduced, right, each of the sections are going to be reduced by 2. So it would be 8, 8, 8, and 7. Okay, or it would be 7, 7, 7, and the remaining 10. Okay, so if you back calculate, right, based on the number of questions right or wrong, based on the percentage, you can easily figure out how many questions you get right and how many questions you get wrong. All right. To make this a little more detailed, right, we have actually written a blog that I'll give you a link to at the end of the webinar, which gives you an explanation of how we back calculate the percentages if you're interested in knowing. But the point that you need to hold on to here is that you can afford only 2 mistakes to get a 51 on quant. Okay with this, guys? So now I think most of your questions have been answered. Most of you all wanted to know how many mistakes you can make. So that's 2. Now, just to make a comparison, right? Just to make a comparison, Saurav, you have a total of 3 quant questions which are going to be experimental. Okay, in the new format, you have only 3 quant sections which are experimental. So what happens, right? And this is my advice to all the test takers out there who are taking the test in a couple of weeks' time. The new format is overall very, very good. Okay, but the downside to the new format, guys, is your experimental questions on quant has reduced drastically. So you have only 3 questions, right? You have only 3 questions which are experimental. So you know that you have to get the entire bulk of the 31 questions right if you're targeting like a 50 or a 51. Okay, you can't afford a couple of mistakes because you don't know. I mean, out of 31 questions, 28 questions are experimental, right? So you don't know whether you can afford that mistake. And remember, on the quant section, the percentiles are very sensitive. So if you make a couple of errors and those couple of errors were not in experimental questions, you are going to be hampered, right? Your score might drop to instead of a 51 to a 50 or a 50 to a 49. All right. So the downside to the change in pattern is you have to be a little careful on the quant section, right? So spend time to read the questions properly. Don't make silly errors. You should be able to score a 50 or a 51. Rajat, it's better for you to go through the GMAT pattern for me to explain what experimental questions are, because I don't think it makes sense for me to do that at this point in the webinar. All right. Okay, Joman, if you need a 50 on quant, if you get a 50 on quant, if you're looking at a 730 plus score, you'll need a 39. If you get a 50 and a 39, you're guaranteed a 730. If you get a 50 and a 42 is what you get, is when you get a 740 or a 750. Mridul, in the GMAT mock test, right? What happens in the GMAT mock test? What happens is the questions that are used there are retired GMAT questions which occurred in actual GMATs around 5 to 6 years, right? So the test has become more dynamic. So what happens is the questions that you're going to see on the actual test and the percentile scales that you're going to work on at the actual test on test day would be different from those on the GMAT prep software. All right. So what happens now? It's better to be on the safer side to factor in an error factor of minus 20 points from what you get on your GMAT prep tests. All right. Okay, so like I said, right, I've put a quant 50 scorer is ESR also here so that we can compare the difference between a 51 and a 50 on quant. You see he's got a 50. Again, I told you the weird pattern exists here. Again, problem solving is at a lower percentile than data sufficiency, but here he's messed up his arithmetic section and he's done relatively well on the algebra and geometry section, right? But the more important bit is the second bit. So what's happened here? He's answered 2 questions wrong in the first section, and he's answered 2 questions wrong in the last section. So for a 50, the maximum we can afford is 4 questions wrong. All right. If you back calculate this, for a 50, the maximum number of questions you can afford to get wrong would be 4. And again, like I said, right, it depends upon the difficulty levels of the questions. So the 4 questions you get wrong should be on the hard and the very hard levels. All right. So for a 51, guys, you can afford 2 mistakes. For a 50, you can afford 4 mistakes. Okay. Any questions on this before I move on to the exact feedback that people have given us for people who've scored 51 on quant? I've also put in my feedback, in those pointers that were given, because I've also taken the GMAT and got a 51. So I've also given my experience on that. All right. Yes, 4 out of 31 questions, Alec, you can afford to get wrong. Yes, Shikhar, it is 5 or 6 incorrect is what the exact number is for a 49. And again, like I said, right, those 5 incorrect or 6 incorrect should be on the slightly harder levels. If you make a couple of silly errors, it might drop to a 48. Okay. Devakar, see, one thing that you read on online is most of the people say that the first 10 questions are very, very important, right? There is truth to that in some cases, right? There is some truth to that. The reason why the first 10 questions are important is not because the entire exam is based on those first 10. It's because the variation in the difficulty levels of the question in the first 10 is much more than in the other 3 sections. Okay, so you're going to get questions which are really easy and questions which are hard also. So if you make mistakes on the easy ones, you're going to be hampered because it's going to affect the next sections. Yes, if you make mistakes in the beginning, Shikhar, on the easier ones, some silly mistakes you make, that's going to hamper your score. All right, because the other sections, the difficulty levels depend upon the first 10, right? All right. Saparja, that's a very that's a very iffy question to ask me. How much will the score down if the 4 questions are easy questions? I don't know for sure, right? And I don't know whether the mistakes they have made here are on the easy and the hard ones. I'm saying it's on the hard ones because he's ended up getting a 50 with 4 mistakes, right? So maybe a 49, I would say. It releases on April 30th, Harith. No, Mridul, there's nothing like more arithmetic questions. See, you feel that there's more arithmetic questions because arithmetic forms the basis of entire math, right? So everything is tested in equal capacities. No, you're going to be penalized more if you have a continuous string of errors, okay? So you're going to be penalized more if you have continuous string of errors because the drop is going to be exponential. So you have to be a little careful, okay, not to make continuous errors. And that's why everybody says that don't be in the scenario of marking 5 questions in the last in the last 10 seconds, because high chance you're going to get all 5 wrong and the score is going to drop. No, Ayush, it's not divided into equal, easy, medium, and hard. That would depend upon how your exam proceeds. So if a person has done really well in the first 2 sections, then he's going to see medium and hard questions only and not easy ones. Yeah. Yes. They've confirmed that April 30th would be the date that the software is going to be updated. All right. No, I wouldn't agree with that, Divakar. I told you, right? All questions are going to be tested in some capacity. Even if you're going really, really bad in your exam, you might get a probability question saying, "What is the probability of getting ahead when you toss one single coin?" Right? So it's not like probability questions and inequality questions are only going to come at the higher levels. That's a misconception. See, Sankalp, and this is for everybody out there, right? I see this question every time. Guys, you're not expected to solve every question in 2 minutes. That's not what anybody says, right? When we say we expect you to solve the question in an average of 2 minutes. When I say an average of 2 minutes, there will definitely be questions that you take only 1 minute to solve. So if you take 1 minute to solve particular questions, you can take 3 minutes to solve another question. The harder questions will require you to spend around 2.5 minutes to get the question right. So the amount of time you save on the easier ones is going to help you on the harder ones. So don't be under the assumption that it's only 2 minutes per question. All right. um Mridul, it's not like that. I think you should be. I mean, this is more of a again a speculation question you're giving me here. There's no different marking as such, right? It's just that the question levels start increasing, and the level you finish at, right, is what score you finally get. So if you don't get questions right, then you're at lower levels. If you get questions right, you get harder levels. I don't know that, Shikhar, how many hard, medium, easy. That would depend upon different test takers, right? Yes, Jomon, Arun, and me both sat to discuss on this time split as soon as we got intimation that the pattern was changed. Okay, so I would definitely advise it because we both sat and discussed on that. It's equal split, Nitish. Data sufficiency and problem solving are both equally. There are equal number of questions there. No, Anisha, it's not about fast with calculation. It's fast with reasoning and fast with thinking. Okay, your calculation is very minimal, right? Calculations, you're not going to be asked to multiply ugly numbers like 1492 into 2497. Okay, nobody's going to ask you to do that. It's more about reasoning and how quickly you reason out the answer, obviously with math involved. Okay, guys. Okay, so I'm moving on to the next bit, right? And like I said, right, I've collated all the points from all test takers. I've scored a 51. I've added my own points also in it, and to illustrate the couple of points, right, they've made. I've put in a couple of questions, and you'll realize why I've put those questions down, right? Because most of you all will be prone to falling for those traps, or prone to fall for those pitfalls that they lay for you in GMAT test. Okay, so I've again arranged the questions in ascending order of difficulty. So you're going to find easy questions in the beginning, but tricky questions in the beginning, and you'll realize how many people answer this wrong. Some questions you're going to go wrong in such a way that you're going to, bonk yourself on the head and say, "How could I have done that?" And then towards the end, we have like 3 to 4 hard questions where I'm going to give you a take back in terms of strategy and tell you how you need to proceed with your test. Okay, so here's the first question, guys. And this was the first say point that most of the 51 scorers told us, that you have to ensure that your basics are spot on, right? So this question tests you entirely on how your basic understanding of median and primes are. So I want all of you all to take a minute and a half, because that's how much I think is required, necessary for this question. I'm giving you all a minute and a half. I want all of you all to give me an answer to this question. Please do not type in the answer in the chat window until I ask you to do so. Your minute and a half starts now. Okay, you can start typing your answers in the chat window, please. All right. So your 1.5 minutes is done. We have a lot of D's, a couple of C's, couple of E's, a couple of A's, couple of B's, right? Now, guys, this is if you want me to put a number on a difficulty level on this question, I would say this would be an easy question. All it does is test you on your basics, right? So for those who got echo as the answer, absolutely fine. For those who didn't get echo as the answer, you'll understand how tricky this question gets if your basics are not in place. So what are the basics that the question is testing you on? It's testing you on the definition of a median. And the definition of a median is always the middlemost value of an arranged set. This is key. Whenever you see the word median, you have to arrange the set either in ascending or descending order. And the second basics it's testing you on is your knowledge of primes. Remember, primes are numbers which can be divisible only by two numbers, one in itself, or basically the numbers which have exactly two factors, one in itself. So one is definitely not prime. For those who considered one to be prime, you messed up this entire question. The first prime number is 2. All right, the first prime number is 2, the next prime number is 3, and it goes on from there. Now, what does the question ask us to find here? Which of the following could be the median of a set consisting of 6 different primes? So I have 6 elements and all of them are prime numbers. And I need the median. So remember, the median is always the middlemost value of an arranged set. If I have an even number of elements of the set, then I have 2 middle values. And the median will always be equal to the average of the middle 2, right? The median will always be equal to the average of the middle 2. Now think about this, right? It's going to be very, very difficult for you to put in numbers in that set and try to solve. It just becomes too horrible because there's so many primes. But think logically. If I need the average of the middle 2 values, my answers definitely cannot be alpha or beta because 2 and 3 are the first 2 primes in the entire number series. So if 2 and 3 are the first 2 primes in the entire number series, they can only be placed on the first 2 positions if I'm going in ascending order, or they can be placed in the last 2 positions if I'm going in descending order. So A and B are very, very, very illogical picks. Okay with how I eliminated A and B, guys? All of you all? Perfect. Now, all the even numbers except for 2. 2 is the only even prime. All the even numbers except for 2 are going to be odd, right? All other primes are odd. And if 2 cannot sit in one of these 2 middle positions, I know that the 2 primes that are going to sit in the middle 2 positions are going to be 2 odd primes. And what do I need to do with these 2 odd primes? I need to add them up and divide by 2 because I need the average of these 2 values to be the median. And remember, an odd plus odd will always give you an even. And if you divide an even number by 2, the average here, which is the median, is always going to be an integer value. An even number divided by 2 will always be perfectly divisible by 2, right? So I'm always going to get an integer value. So I cannot, in any case, have the median here to be a decimal. So out goes C, out goes D. You're left with the only logical choice, and that is echo. Why, Shikhar? I mean, why should it be an odd or even? There's only one even prime, right? So when I have a total of odd, if I have a total of 6 primes and they all are going to be different primes, right? I know the values that are going to sit in the middle two positions are only going to be odd primes. I can't have an even prime to sit, right? This is where your basics come into play, Anisha. You can't have a negative number as a prime, right? So this is where you should know the definition of a negative. You should know the definition of a prime. A prime is defined as a number which has only two factors, one in itself. You can't consider factors to be negative. Okay, there cannot be any negative primes. If there were negative primes, then your LCM concept will go out of the window, right? Because you're going to divide them by negative values. And even divided by 2, I'm not saying, Shikhar, I'm not saying that this should be odd or even. I'm saying an even divided by 2 has to be an integer value. It can be either odd or even. I'm not bothered about that. I am worried about the integer values, because then if I know I should get an integer value, I can eliminate the 9.5 and the 12.5 because they are decimal values, right? I can't get a decimal when an even is divided by 2. Got this? I can't have a decimal value when even is divided by 2. So the only logical choice here would be 39. So the first point, right, that most of the people who've got 51 on quant say that your basics has to be spot on, right? You should know the definition of primes here. You should know the definition of a median. You should know that primes cannot be negative. You should know that an odd plus odd will always give you even, and an even divided by 2 will always give you an integer. All of these basics put together is what is going to lead to your answer of 39. Okay with this, guys? Any questions on this? Any more questions on this? Perfect. So, guys, last call for questions, or I can move on to the next question. Okay. So, like I said, your basics on problem solving has to be very, very strong. The same holds good for a data sufficiency. Okay. So, for those who are new to a data sufficiency, guys, you'll have to look at the two statements and you'll have to check whether this information given in the statements are sufficient to answer the question or not. All right, guys. So again, same rule applies. This time I'm going to give you 2 minutes for you to think through the question. So your 2 minutes start now. Okay, guys. So your 2 minutes is up. So very good question to start off with. Most of you all have given me a good answer. I'm assuming that you've analyzed the statements combined properly because that's going to be the focus of my attention in this question. So the question says, if Q is an integer, is Q odd? The first statement tells me Q by 3 is an integer. So think about it, guys. If Q by 3 can be an integer, I know Q can take a lot of values. Q can take 3, Q can take a value 6, 9. It's basically going to be any multiple of 3. Yes? So I know that is Q odd. This gives me a yes. This gives me a no. So clearly, quickly, I can disprove the first statement to be insufficient. And the 3 possible choices are B, C, and E. So 3Q is an integer. Now think about this. If 3Q is an integer, and this is for those who gave delta as the answer and beta to be the answer, guys, what you did is, again, it's a problem with the basics. You forgot to check for fractions. If 3Q has to be an integer, Q can be 1, Q can be 2, Q can also be 1 by 3. Yes? So I can have multiple possibilities for Q. So Q can be either even or odd, or neither even nor odd, right? It can be a fraction. So out goes B. Now when I combine the two, I have Q by 3 to be an integer and 3Q to be an integer. Now, and this is the question to all. This is a question to all people who combine the statements, right? Okay, so I know 3Q is an integer, so it has to be 1, 2, and so on, right? I mean, it's anyway disproved. It gives me a no here, and this gives me a yes, isn't it? Now, when I combine the two statements, guys, and this is for everybody who've combined the statements, I want you to tell me, how did you for sure say that Q can be even or odd? How are you so sure that Q can be both even as well as odd? If you take a value of 3 and if you take a value of 6, right? Now that's one way to work it out. This is a very, very simple question to start off with, but there's one thing that I want to point out here, and this anyway would be pointed out in your classroom sessions. For those who attended the classroom sessions would have worked this out very, very well. See, whenever you're combining statements in such an easy question, it becomes easier for combining the statements using numbers, right? But if you're not able to use numbers, right, one big data sufficiency strategy is you can manipulate the statements by performing a mathematical operation on them. For example, I can multiply the two statements. Q by 3 into 3Q is going to be an integer into an integer, which is another integer, right? Q by 3 into 3Q is going to be an integer into an integer with another integer. If I cancel the 3's here, I'm going to get Q squared to be an integer. And remember, if Q square is an integer, all the statements combined give me is that Q is an integer. It doesn't give me any information whether the value of Q is going to be either even or odd. So on this question, right, it was very simple for you to take in values for Q and put it into the statements and then combine the statements also by using the values. But if you're not able to figure out, right, those values that are satisfying both statements consecutively, then the best thing to do is to always manipulate the two statements simultaneously, right? And how can you manipulate them? You can perform any mathematical operation that you want between the two statements as long as you don't go against what the statement specifies. For example, I'm taking Q by 3 and multiplying it by 3Q, right? So Q by 3 into 3Q is Q square. That's an integer into an integer, which will always be an integer. So if Q square is an integer, all I have information about is Q is an integer, and that's what the question stem anyway states. So the question is Q odd, right? So I can't say from this whether Q is odd or not. So the answer here is echo. No, I'm not considering fractions, Anisha. Okay, I'm not considering fractions. I'm just saying that I just would have taken 1 by 3 if the question did not state if q is an integer. Let's do this. Okay, let's do this. If suppose I had not given you this constraint, right? Think about it like this. Okay, if I had not given you this constraint, then it makes evaluation of the question slightly, problematic, especially when you combine, right? Because when you combine the statements, now you can use fractions, now you can use integers, you can use negative values, you can use positive values. So if I had not given you the constraint, if q is an integer, then combining the two statements would have become a little more problem for you, because you'll have to check for all types of values then, isn't it? Think about it. If I had not given you q to be an integer, then combination would have been a problem, especially for those who used numbers quickly for q, integer values quickly, right? Perfect. All right, guys. Now the second point, the third point, right? Yes, the answers will still be E, Shikhar. Nothing is changing, because then you'll also check for fractions. But I'm saying, right, going back to this, if I had not given you this constraint, if q is an integer, then my strategy here of combining the statements and performing the mathematical operation between the statements will give you better clarity on things, rather than me plugging in different types of values to satisfy both statements simultaneously, right? So you have to be a little careful when you have constraints. Okay, constraints sometimes make things easier, constraints sometimes make things harder. But normally on a data sufficiency question, when you don't have constraints, you have to be doubly careful in checking even fractions. All right, guys. So the second point, right? The second point that most of the test takers gave us as a feedback was, they said that you should always be patient, never jump to the solution just because you're able to solve the questions in say a minute or so. Okay, and you should always try to avoid very common traps on easy quant problems, because if you mess up the easy problems, you're going to have a big problem to scale up to the harder levels. All right, so here's your question. I'm going to give you only a minute to solve this. Very simple. Your 1 minute starts now. I just made a point that don't jump to your solutions, and I've already got 7 people giving me the solution that I don't want. Why will I use the answer choices here, Ayush? It's a very simple equation question. You would use the answer choices when the question is really hard. Okay, never try to only look at the answer choices every time. Creating equations here would make more sense. Okay, guys. So we have an approximate equal split between answer choice Charlie and answer choice Echo. And this is an example of a problem that you cannot afford to get wrong, because you've come to the answer, but you've not read the question carefully. For those who have answered Charlie as the answer, which is the clear trap answer, you have not read what the question asks you. The question asks you, what is the total amount that Ben paid for the purchase? the total amount he pays for the purchase is the cost of the item plus the sales tax of 8%. Right? 400 here is only the cost of the item. It's not the total amount that he paid for the purchase. So this question is a very, very, very easy question. I would rate it at something like a 450 or a 500 level question, right? If you get cook wrong on these types of questions, it's just going to hamper your entire score. One thing you'll have to be very, very, very careful of is you'll have to read the questions very, very carefully here. And the GMAT is not going to make things easy for you by wording the question in a very lucid manner. They're going to twist and turn the questions and make it very, very problematic to gain information from those questions. Okay. So for those who work this out, it's very, very simple. If I keep the price of the item to be X, the question says the sales tax is 8%. So the sales tax is going to be 8% of X. If the sales tax had only been 5%, then Ben would have paid $12 less sales tax. So if it was 5x by 100, the sales tax, then the difference between these two is $12. So a clear linear equation that you can form here. So that's 3x by 100 is equal to 12. So 3 1s are 3 4s are. X is going to be equal to 400. Remember guys, 400 is not your answer here. 400 here is the cost of the item. The question asks you the total amount that Ben paid for the purchase, and the total amount is 400 inclusive of the 8% sales tax, and the 8% sales tax is 32, which gives you the answer as 432. So you understand why this is a very, very important point that every test taker tells you. Don't jump to a solution. Always read the questions carefully and avoid such easy traps, okay, on very, very easy questions. Because if you fall for these traps, there's going to be a problem. And remember when we looked at the ESR reports, we had a 51 and a 50, and both had slightly lower problem solving percentiles, right? And the reason they have lower problem solving percentiles is because of these silly errors that they have made on problem solving questions, okay? Because here you have to answer specifically what the question asks you. Okay with this, guys? So I'm sure most of you all who gave me C as the answer would be, bonking yourself on the head and saying, okay, how could I make this mistake? So be a little careful, and this is especially for test takers who are taking the test up in another 2 weeks. Make sure you read the questions carefully. Always be clear in your mind, even when you read quant questions. Okay, if you're able to read verbal questions very carefully, you can also read quant questions carefully. Please make sure you read questions carefully. Okay, guys. So another example, just to bring you up to speed to why reading the question makes more sense. And a very easy question again with a very complicated usage of words. Okay, so I want you to try this. I'm going to give you another minute to solve this. Your time starts now. All right. So the key here is to read the questions very carefully, right? I have a lot of people who gave me B, some people gave me E, some of you all have given me C, right? The key here is only to read the question carefully. If you read the question carefully, you're going to get your answer very quickly. And remember, when you're reading questions, right? When you're reading questions, you always break the question into parts and read. Never read the question all together at once. The question says, before being simplified, the instructions for computing income tax in country were to add 2% of one's annual income to the average of 100 units of country R's currency and 1% of one's annual income. Now, if you read all of this together, right, it becomes too problematic. And if you go further, which of the following represents a simplified formula for computing the income tax in country R's currency for a person in that country whose annual income is I? So if you read everything together, right, things becomes too problematic to, split apart. So read it in parts. The instructions for computing income tax in country were to add 2% of one's annual income. And remember, the annual income is given as I. So that should be 2% of I to the average of 100 units of country R's currency. That is, this is added to the average of 100 units of country R's currency and 1% of one's annual income. So annual income I know is I. So 100 plus 1% of I need the average of these two. So I'm going to divide this entire term by 2. Right? Because the question says the average of 100 units of country R's currency and 1% of one's annual income. So 100 plus 1 by 100 I divided by 2. And I need to simplify this because the question says I want the simplified formula. So 2 by 100 I plus, I'm going to split this up. That's going to be 50 plus I by 200. Right? I'm going to split this fraction up. So 100 by 2 gives me 50 and 1 by 100 I divided by 2 gives me 1 I by 200. Now I'm going to add i's here. I'm going to take the LCM of 2 by 100 I and I by 200 and I'm going to keep the 50 as it is. So 200, that's 4I plus I plus 50. That's 5I by 200 plus 50. 5 ones are 5 40s are, that gives me I by 40 plus 50. So the answer here has to be Charlie. Yes. So you'll realize, guys, the key here is to read the questions carefully. If you read the questions carefully, break it down into parts, things become much simpler for you to solve. Okay. No, it's not. It's an official question, Sankalp. So it's not something you can dispute, right? It's an official question. This is an official GMAT prep question that I pulled out. Okay, it is an official question that I pulled out. So there's nothing about modifier error, right? The question directly says the annual's income is added to the average of 100 units of our currency and 1% of one's annual income. The average always has to be between two objects, right? Something and something, or three objects, right? Something and something and something. So obviously it's straightforward. There's nothing wrong in this question. Hundred is also more than two. What is 100 is also more than two? It's I didn't understand your question, Sankal. It says here directly, right? 100 units of country R's currency, right? So if it's telling me to add up 100 units of country R's currency and 1% of one's annual income and take the average of these two, right? So I need to take the average of 100 units of country R's currency. I don't know what the units are. And 1% of the annual income. So 1% of the income is anyway, it's going to be in the currency that is given, right? So 100 plus 1 by 100 I divided by 2 would give me the average for the two. No. You are assuming that the one unit is one currency. Okay, I is the annual income. So you're telling me that if you get an annual income of I, you're always getting 100 units. You're always going to get one unit. Your annual income can be 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000, right? Nowhere in the question have they told you that I is equal to one unit. You can't make that assumption. Where have they told you that I is equal to 1 unit? Have they told you anywhere? Nowhere else, right? How can you assume that? And any person's annual income is going to be different, right? It's not going to be the same. Got this? It's a straightforward question. Just adding of two elements and dividing by 2. That's all. Exactly. It doesn't matter because they're asking me the average anyway, right? Okay. So guys, here's your next question. This question is relatively tougher compared to the other ones that I've chosen previously. So another feedback that test takers have given us is on data sufficiency question. It makes most sense, and this is a point that even I would endorse. This is my point that I've added on these slides. Always make sure to learn to break down the question stem, right? Try to leverage the data that is given to you before jumping into the statements. So this is a good, tough question. I'm going to give all of you all 2 minutes to solve. The time starts now. Last call for answers, guys. 10 seconds more. All right. So this is a point that I endorse personally, and especially this question is meant for people looking to score in the 700 ranges and trying to get a 49 and a 50 on quant, right? On the harder levels of questions, you'll need to learn to take out information from the question stem itself before jumping into the statements. Many people in the first and the second phase of prep make this very big mistake of just skipping statements saying that it's insufficient without actually checking whether the statements are insufficient or not. And they just overlook the question stem. The question stem for them just is a question that you need to answer. But no, on the harder levels of questions, they're always going to give you some hidden pieces of information in the question stem. So what I'm going to do is, once I see a question like this, right, I'm going to first try to analyze what the question stem is trying to tell me. Question is, what is the last digit of 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial till n factorial? And remember, guys, your basic understanding of factorials is required here. So if n was equal to 1, then this would have become 1 factorial, and the units digit of 1 factorial will still be 1. If n was 2, then this would become 1 factorial plus 2 factorial, and the unit digit there is going to be 1 plus 2, which is 3. If n was 3, then this is going to become 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial. That's 1 plus 2, 3 factorial, remember, is 6. This gives me the unit digit to be 9. When n is equal to 4, I'm going to get 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial plus 4 factorial. That's 1 plus 2 plus 6. And remember, 4 factorial is 4 3s are 12, 12 2s are 24. So the units digit here is 1 plus 2, 3, 3 plus 6, 9, 9 plus 4 is 3 again. And if I put n is equal to 5, right? Now think about this. 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial plus 4 factorial plus 5 factorial is what I get. 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial plus 4 factorial always gives me a unit digit 3. But 5 factorial will always give me a unit digit 0. So even if I take n is equal to 5, the unit digit of that entire sum is still going to remain 3. Even if I take n is equal to 6, I know that 5 factorial will give me a unit digit 0. I also know that 6 factorial also is going to give me a unit digit 0. Basically, any value I take beyond 4 is always going to give me a fixed unit digit to be equal to 3. So when n is greater than or equal to 5, the unit digit will always be fixed to be 3. That's the hidden piece of information that I need to take out from the question stem. If I'm able to take that out, the analysis of the statements become very simple. The first statement says n is divisible by 4. So if n is a positive integer and it's divisible by 4, the values of n can be 4, 8, 12, and so on. So if the value of n is 4, then the units digit is going to be 3. If n is equal to 8, that's still greater than or equal to 5, the unit digit is still going to remain 3. If n is equal to 12, the unit digit is still going to remain 3. So the first statement clearly gives me enough information to answer the main question. And the two possible answer choices are AD. Okay, please, guys. Should be very careful in such questions. This is a high level question, right? This is what you can expect at the close to 700 ranges. You'll have to learn to leverage the information given in the question stem itself. Now let's work with the second statement. The second statement says n square plus 1 divided by 5 is an odd integer. So if I give you n square plus 1 by 5 is an odd integer, I'm going to think about what possible values of n will satisfy the statement. Remember, the rule of a data sufficiency is you use values to satisfy the statement first. Then you cross check with the main equation. The first value that I can use for n here is 2. Because if n is 2, 2 square is going to be 4. 4 plus 1 gives me 5. 5 divided by 5 gives me 1, which is an odd integer. So n definitely can be 2. N cannot be 3 because 3 square plus 1 gives me 10. 10 by 5 gives me 2, which is not an odd integer. N can't be 4. N can't be 5. N can't be 6. N can't be 7. 7 square is 49. 49 plus 1 is 50. 50 by 5 gives you 10, which is not an odd integer. But n can be 8. 8 square is 64. 64 plus 1 gives you 65. So 65 divided by 5 gives you 13, which is an odd integer. So I know that n can be 2, 8, and so on, right? I'm not going to go beyond this because I know that any value of n beyond 8 is always going to give me the unit digit to be 3. So the two possible values I'm going to check for here for is n is equal to 2. And when n is equal to 2, I know the unit digit is going to be 3. When n is equal to 8, the unit digit is still going to be 3. And if n is any value greater than 8 which satisfies the statement, the unit digit is still going to remain 3. So the second statement is also enough to answer the main question with a definite answer. So the answer here has to be delta. So for those who got delta, good attempt. For those who got alpha, then you failed to analyze the second statement properly. You would have taken values of n, which gives you n square plus 1 by 5 is an even integer. For those who've got only alpha as the answer, I'm sure you guys must have put n is equal to 3 also and said it was sufficient, or n is equal to 7 also and said it was sufficient. Sankalp, when I tell you a number from 1 to n, right, I have to include, I can take 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, no? Doesn't matter if I have to take, if I ask you what is the sum of the first n natural numbers, it's n into n plus 1 by 2. It doesn't matter which natural numbers I take, whether it's only a single number 1 or a single number 2 or a single number 3. The first statement just tells you n is divisible by 4, right? So if n is divisible by 4, n can be 4, 8, 12, 16, and so on. If n is 4, then the question becomes, what is the last digit of 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial plus 4 factorial? So 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial plus 4 factorial gives you a unit digit of 3. And any value of n to be greater than 4, right, or greater than or equal to 5 will still give you a unit digit 3. If you take n is equal to 8 also, you're going to get a unit digit 3 because any value beyond 5 factorial will always give you a unit digit 0. You can't assume things like that, Sankalp. If I'm telling you from 1 to n, obviously n can be 1, n can be 2, n can be 3, right? Okay with this, guys? All of y'all? So the questions you see realized has become a little harder, more trickier, and this is what you can expect at the higher levels. Okay with this? Any other doubts on this? We can move on to the next question. The take back from this question is always make sure to break down the question stem, leverage the data given from the question stem. Don't directly jump into the statements, all right? All topics, Jomon. I'm not going to tell you what topics are there because I really don't know, right? All topics are tested in some capacity or the other. Abhinav, I would definitely rate this as a question slightly close to a 700, okay? Okay, guys, on the same note, on DS questions, learn to break down the question stem. Here's another question, guys. This is an official GMAT question. Vivek, unit digit and last digit is the same, right? If you're dealing with integers, the unit digit and the last digit is the same, right? Guys, your 2 minutes start now. Sangram, you've given all questions, all the answers to all questions right up till now. So just spend some more time, okay, on the question stem, because the harder levels of questions, you can't afford to make silly errors. Guys, take back what we discussed in the previous question, right? Spend more time on the question stem, right? Don't worry about the statements. Try to break down the question stem, then work with the statements. The evaluation of the statements become easier. Last 30 seconds. Okay. So I see a lot of C's, some A's, some B's, some D's, right? So let's work this out, okay? And this is what I do. Again, this is my slide. This is what I would recommend to all students, being a faculty also. On DS questions, the key, especially in geometry and especially in questions like factorials or powers, exponents, arithmetic, and word problems, right? The key is to always break down the question stem. And whenever you work with a geometry question, for those who've attended my sessions, I would have reiterated this multiple times. I said when you have a circle, the radii are always your friend. Remember? So the radius will always help you out. And remember, there was one more point that I made in class. I said that whenever you work with a data sufficiency question with geometry, you always represent unknown angles with variables, and you try to represent all other angles with that same variable, right? And then we can work with it, isn't it? So I'm going to put that 2 points that I discussed with you in class into play here. I'm going to break down the question first. Point O is the center of the semicircle, so I know this is the center. If this is the center, I know quickly OB, OC, OD all become the radii of that semicircle. So I know that OB will be equal to OC, will be equal to OD. Got this? Now, the question also goes on to say points B, C, and D lie on the semicircle. Perfect. If the length of the line segment AB, this is AB, is equal to OC. So AB is equal to OC. So if AB is equal to OC, then it has to be equal to OB also, because OB and OC are the radii, and AB also now is going to be equal to OB. And remember, guys, what I told you in the sessions there. I told you that whenever you have radii, look for isosceles triangles or equilateral triangles. And I told you to also represent the unknown angles with variables. The question says now, what is the degree measure of angle BAO? So I need this angle. So I'm going to call that angle to be x. All right. Now, since I know ABO is isosceles, angle BOA is also going to be x. That makes this angle ABO as 180 minus 2x. So if this is 180 minus 2x, this angle OBC will be 2x. And if triangle OBC is isosceles, since OB is equal to OC, that makes this angle C also equal to 2x, which makes this angle O as 180 minus 4x. Basically, what I've done is I've represented all the angles in that figure in terms of x. And remember, the question is asking me what is the value for x. I have to solve for that. The first statement tells me angle COD is 60. Angle COD, according to my calculation, and this entire angle is 180. So it's going to be 180 minus x plus 180 minus 4x. It's definitely going to give me a value in terms of x. So I can solve for x because that is equal to 60 degrees. I'm just going to write this down. I know COD. This is angle COD. Angle COD is going to be 180 minus this entire angle, x plus 180 minus 4x, which is equal to 60. Using this, I can definitely solve for x. The first statement is sufficient, AD. The second statement says, the degree measure of angle BCO is 40. BCO is already given to me as 2x. So if I have 2x is equal to 40, x I know is going to be 20. The answer here has to be delta. Got this, guys? Shikhar, if this angle is 180 minus 2x, this has to be x because it's on the same straight line, right? Right. So if it's on the same straight line, if that angle ABO is 180 minus 2x, then angle CBO has to be 2x, right? Because it's on the same straight line. So guys, what I did in this question, you see, is whenever I looked at whenever I work with a circle question, I always look for the radii. And once I got the radii, I always looked for the isosceles triangles. And the rule that I always follow, right, for a data sufficiency question in terms of geometry is I always represent the unknown variables, unknown angles with variables. And then I try to represent all the other angles in terms of that variables. I try to limit the number of variables to choose. And then I see what the question asks me to find out. No, I don't need to solve it, no, Nidhi. It's a data sufficiency, right? So is that data sufficient to answer the question? Definitely yes, because I can solve for x. The second also gives me 2x, so I can solve for x, right? It's data sufficiency. I don't need to give the answer. The answer here will be both statements individually are sufficient. Sankalp, any line drawn on the GMAT is a straight line unless mentioned, okay? Geometry will not exist if you don't have straight lines then. Then you can't have any triangle. If I give you a triangle, then you can't. If I assume that all the sides of the triangle are curves, then it's not possible for me to solve any question in geometry, right? The only thing you cannot assume are the angles. And the only thing you cannot assume are the lengths of the lines. Unless it is mentioned that the angle is something, and unless it is mentioned that the length is something, you can't make that assumption. No, you can't solve the question from the state without the statement, Shikhar. It's not possible. You just can't solve it because the Jomon, this would be a hard level question. Okay, this is an official GMAT prep question which I've pulled out again, right? It's a hard level question. Shikhar, yeah, see, your point is you're able to solve for the value x, right? You're not going to be able to solve for x there. You're going to be everything is going to cancel in your equation that you formed. Unless I have a definite value, just calculate your equation, right? What equation you're giving me is 0 is equal to 0. Any three-sided closed figure, Sankalp, is a triangle. You can't question those things, right? Any three-sided closed figure that you have is a triangle, right? So you can't question whether a line is a line or a triangle is a triangle. A triangle is a three-sided closed figure. I can't make an assumption on what type of triangle it is. Okay, that's a triangle for sure, but I don't know what type of triangle that is, right? So any three-sided closed figure is a triangle. Okay, so I think you're taking assumptions to a completely new level, which you cannot do, right? A line is a line. Any line is a line. Any three-sided closed figure is a triangle. The what you cannot make assumptions are or on angles and on length of sides and whether a triangle is isosceles, equilateral, or scalene, right? That you have to look for definite pieces of information. Definitely not, Jomon. If I don't have it to be semicircles and I don't know whether the radii, I don't know if that's a center and I don't know if it's a radius also, right? So I will not get the relationship between the sides then. Okay, fine. So guys, take back two things from the previous question and from this question. It's imperative that on the harder levels of question, you spend some time on the question stem. Okay. If you do so, the analysis of the statements are going to be much simpler for you to solve. All right. So here's your next question. Again, same procedure. I'm going to give you 2 minutes and you can type in your answer at the end of 2 minutes, please. Please wait for me to ask you for the answer choices. Wait for me to ask you what the answer is, right? Please don't type in the chat window because it affects the other people who are working out this question, right? So your 2 minutes start now. All right, you can start typing your answers in the chat window, please. Sangram, take back what I'm telling you, right? Make sure you spend time on the question stem. Don't miss out critical pieces of information. Last 10 seconds. All right. So, like I said again, right, the catch is to break down the question stem. See, on the harder levels of questions, right, and this is for both quant as well as verbal, the questions become more, test you more on a logical aspect of things rather than the mathematical aspect. So if the logic aspect of things fail, then the mathematical aspect will fall flat. That is why most of you all don't like the concept of permutations, combinations, and probability, because there the question depends upon logic and not too much upon math. And this question is pretty much the same. If you're not going to break down the question properly, it becomes a problem. See, what they tell me is AB and CD, AB into CD is 1995. And in the correctly worked multiplication problem above, each symbol represents a different non-zero digit. So A is a different digit, B is a different digit, C and D are both different digits. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to break down the question stem. I'm going to see what possible combinations of two-digit numbers can I multiply to get 1995. So I'm going to divide this. I'm going to prime factorize this. 5 3s are 15. I'm left with 4. 5 9s are 45. Left 4, that's 9. So 3, that's 133. 133 is divisible by 7. So 7 1s are 7. 7 9s are 63. And 19 is prime. So 19 into 1 is 19. So I need to look at what combinations of numbers should I multiply to give me two-digit numbers which multiply to 1995. So 5 into 3 gives me 15, but 19 into 7 is going to give me 133, which is a 3-digit number. So I can't take that combination. But one combination I can take is 5 into 7, 35, and 19 into 3, 57. That's one possible combination, but this is something I cannot consider because the question directly tells me each symbol represents a different non-zero digit. So if this is AB and this is CD, then B and C would have the same digit, right? So I cannot consider the 35 into 57 case. So the only other possibility I can consider is when I take 19 into 5, which gives me 95, and 7 into 3, which gives me 21. So AB into CD can be 95 into 21, or the reverse scenario, 21 into 95. These would be the two possibilities based on the question stem. And the question asks me, what is the value of C? The first statement tells me that D is prime. Now, if D is prime, of the two cases that I have, 95 and 21 and 21 and 95, I cannot consider the first case because D here is 1. And 1 is definitely not a prime number. But in the second case, D here is 5. So the only possible split now would be 21 into 95, which gives me the value of C to be 9. So the first statement is definitely sufficient. The second statement tells me that B is not prime. So when B is not prime, think about it, guys. When B is not prime, what would be the cases here? When B is not prime, again, I can't take the 21 into 95 case. Think about it. I cannot take the 21 into 95 case. I can only take the 95 into 21 case, in which it gives me a definite answer for C. So the answer here has to be delta. Got this, guys? The answer here has to be delta because it gives me one definite answer for C in both cases. Okay with this, all of y'all? Everybody? So you realize how you need to spend some more time on the question stem, right? And hold on to every small bit of information that the question gives you. If you don't, then this would be the problem. These are the traps that the GMAT would lay, right? And on data sufficiency question, it becomes a little more trickier because you'll have to juggle between a lots of information, right? So if you miss out on one, it becomes a big problem. See, Abhinav, this again would be a harder level question. The questions that I've given you for the past 2-3 questions, right, are questions of the higher level. So the questions I gave you in the beginning would be questions of a lower level. The point I'm trying to make is on the lower levels of questions, you can't afford silly errors. On the harder levels of questions, you need to concentrate a little more on the question stem itself and take into consideration every piece of information that the question gives you. Okay with this, guys? So agree with me, the logical aspect here of breaking down the question was more important than jumping into the statements, right? Okay. Now here's another question. This I would definitely classify as a 720, 730 level question because most people don't have a particular approach to solve. So one thing, right? And before I don't want all of you all to solve this question right away. I want to tell you something and I want to take back something from this. This was a point that was discussed all across the board from all the 51 people who scored 51 on quant. What they said was whenever they solved questions, whether it is from the official guide, quant review, or whether it's from the other resources, they always looked at what was the simplest way to get to the answer. And what helped them out to identify these simpler ways was the review process entirely. So they reviewed the questions. The review process, they did it for two things. One, they reviewed the questions they answered incorrectly, but they also reviewed the questions which took them too much time to solve. And in the process of doing that review of questions which took too much time to solve, they identified much more simpler strategies and concepts to get to an answer. Right? Again, for those who attended the sessions here, I think you can identify what concept this question tests you on. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I want all of you all to solve this in 2 minutes. So time starts now. Okay, for those who have finished, you can start typing your answers in the chat window. Last call for answers, last 10 seconds. All right. So the reason why I picked this question, right, is for me to make a point that whenever you encounter questions like these, which are, slightly hard to solve with by making equations, you need to think of different procedures to get to an answer. What this question basically tests you on is what the GMAT calls the weighted average concept. And whenever you have a weighted average concept being tested, you can always use the allegations or the mixture diagram to solve to get to an answer. Now, what is the allegation of the mixture diagram? The allegation of the mixture diagram consists of 4 arms. Okay, 4 arms put like this, where the left arm holds the higher value, the right arm holds the lower value. And when you mix any quantity with a higher value with a quantity with a lower value, you always get something in between, which is called the mean value. And what you do with this mixture allegation or mixture diagram, I'm sure you would have come across this when you studied for aptitude, is we always subtract the quantities along the diagonals. So at this point, we get HP minus MV. And at this point, we get MV minus LV. And what we end up getting is a ratio in which the two quantities are going to be mixed. And this mixture diagram, right, can be solved whenever you encounter weighted average questions where you're asked to mix averages of two different quantities. The question here tells me that each employee of a certain task force is either a manager or a director. What percent of the employees in the task force are directors? The first statement tells me that the average salary of the managers on the task force is 5,000 less than the average salary of all the employees. Now think about it, right? For me to figure out the average salary of all the employees, I need to combine or mix the average salary of the managers to the average salary of the directors to give me the entire overall average of the employees in the task force. So I know I can use the mixture allegation of the mixture diagram to solve this question. And I'm only going to work with statement 1. Statement 1 says, the average salary of the managers in the task force is 5,000 less than the average salary of all the employees in the task force. So let me keep the average salary of all the employees to be an unknown quantity X, and the average salary of the managers on the task force is 5,000 less. So I'm going to keep this as X minus 5,000. This would be the average salary of the managers. And I'm going to subtract these quantities along the diagonals. So X minus 5,000 becomes X minus X plus 5,000, which gives me 5,000. But remember, I need to get this entire ratio to solve, right? I don't have any information about the directors at all. So the first statement is clearly insufficient. The second statement is the same as the first. All it does is it tells me that the average salary of the directors is 15,000 greater. So this is X plus 15,000. That's the directors. Then the average salary of all the employees. So if I'm subtracting along the diagonals, I'm going to get this point to be 15,000. Clearly, I have no information about the average salary of the managers here and the relationship between the average salary of the managers and the average salary of all employees. So the second statement is also insufficient. Now I'm combining the two statements. The first statement says that the average salary of the managers is 5,000 less than the average salary of all the employees in the task force. So this is going to be X minus 5,000. And D is X plus 15,000. So when I subtract the quantities along the diagonals, I have 15,000 at this point, and I have 5,000 at this point. And what this gives me is a ratio of the number of directors and the number of managers in that company. So the ratio here is 1:3. So now I have information that the ratio of D is to M is 1:3. So clearly if D is to M is 1:3, then D is to M can be written as 1/4 and 3/4. And 1/4 is 25% and 3/4 is 75%. So clearly I can find out what percent of employees in the task force are directors, because here it is 25%. The answer is Charlie. No, it gives me the number. It'll always give me the number, Jomon, the number of directors and the number of managers being mixed. Okay. You can't take 5K and 15K, right? Because you're not mixing a constant 5K with a constant 15K to get something in between. If I am adding 5K and 15K, Anisha, I'm going to get 20K, right? It's like a mixture, right? If you mix a 40% with a 20%, you're always going to get something in between the two. Yes. To derive the ratio, you can use the 5,000 and 15,000 directly, right? Because I'm just going by what information is given in the question and introducing the X, right? It doesn't make sense for me to use 5,000, 15,000 directly and tell you the ratio is 1:3. No. So I work with the question directly. Obviously, I know that X is going to cancel out everywhere, right? Jomon, all the scenarios where you can use the allegation, let me write it down for you here. See, all the cases where you can use an allegation question, right, is when you have any question associated with the word per. Remember, I sent you some documents today over an email, right? Now, in that documents, there's a separate file called mixtures, and in that mixture set of questions, right, I've given all different types of questions where the allegations and mixture rule can be used. So you can use it for mixing averages. You can use it for mixing ratios. You can use it for mixing percentages. You can use it for mixing costs, because when I say cost, I'll say the cost of rice is going to be $50 per kg. I can also use it for mixing, say anything associated with the word per. Okay, give me another example of a value associated with the word per. Averages, I've given you. Ratios, I've given you. Percentages, I've given you. Costs, I've given you. I can use it even for speeds if I want, because speeds also are given in the form kilometers per hour, right? So any quantity which can be associated with the word per, right, is something that you can always think of using the allegation. Kamal, he had mailed me separately, right? So you can mail me for the document if you want. So this is for the classroom students. I had made a separate document with a certain set of questions. So he asked me for it, so I gave that. So you can solve that question. You can solve the document, Jomon. It's going to be a really good set of questions, and you'll understand where all you can use the mixture diagram there. Okay, because there are examples for averages, ratios, percentages, costs, and even speeds. Correct, guys. The point I'm making here is you need to think about different ways of getting to an answer, because if I try to create equations in this question, is just going to be horrible for me to solve, right? I'll have to take the average as AM, then AD, then overall average as AA, then take the number of directors as D, managers as M, and then solve with that. It becomes too problematic to solve in the time frame of 2 minutes. So this is where, so these types of questions, when you encounter in your practice and you review them, right, you get to know different procedures to get to an answer, right? And one procedure which is always come in handy is always the allegation, the mixture diagram, which can be made use for averages, percentages, ratios, costs, and speeds. Okay with this, guys? So last question. Now this is a very hard one. Okay, I want you to try it. This I would definitely classify at a good high level. All right, and you'll realize for those who also attended my sessions here, I not discussed about modulus. When you add modulus, what do you do, right? So I want you to try this out. I'm going to give all of you all 2.5 minutes to solve. This is the last question for the day, but there's a take back in this question. Your time starts now. All right. So I see a lot of D's. Good attempt on this question. I would definitely want to know how you guys went about solving this. Okay, I would definitely want to know how you went about solving this. Okay, so most of you all plugged in values. All right, perfect. But you'll realize that plugging in values here, okay, it made the question a little easier. But what if I'd given you another mod, or what if I changed the range to be greater than 10 and so on? See, plugging in, right? Plugging in, like I said, and I also mentioned in the class. Yes, Vivek, you're right. Critical points would be easier. See, like I mentioned in the class, right? You can, whenever you see a question which is slightly out of the box in a modulus, you can always resort to plugging in. It'll always serve you in a very good manner, right? So the reason why I'm discussing this question is because recently a student sent me a question from the GMAT prep software which had a couple of mods added to each other, and I wanted to take care of this concept. Okay, so I'm going to explain this. In a very logical manner, a very simple manner, and the procedure I'm giving you always holds good whenever you have modulus values added to each other. Whenever you have modulus values added to each other, you can always use this process of working. Remember, a modulus or an absolute value is always the distance that you're going to travel on the number line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the number line and I'm going to place the critical points here. Right? For those who don't know modulus, then it's okay. You don't need to worry. It's better for you to look at the concept and then come back to this. But for those who know how to solve a modulus, I'm going to place the critical points. So the critical points are at -1, at 0, and at +3. Now, whenever you're adding sets of moduli, right? It's like the distance that three people are traveling. Let's assume that three friends, there's going to be three friends A, B, and C. A's house is located at -1, B's house is at 0, and C's house is at +3. And they all together have to travel a distance which is less than 10 units. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check, okay, how is it possible for all of them to travel a distance of less than 10 units? So the first way I can take the traveling to be is when A goes to B's house. Say if A travels to B's house, the distance that A travels is 1 unit from -1 to 0. Now A is at this point. Now both A and B are traveling to C. Now the distance between B's house to C's house is 3 units. And that 3 units, B is also going to cover that 3 units. A is also going to cover that 3 units. So the total distance covered by A and B to go to C's house will be 6 units. So now all three of them, A, B, and C, are at C's house. And the total distance covered by A and B to travel to C's house is going to be 7 units. And I know that the total distance that all three of them have to travel has to be less than 10 units. So let me calculate for equal to 10. If I need to calculate the value of the distance to be equal to 10, since already 7 units have been traveled, all three of them now have to travel the remaining 3 units. And if all three of them are going to travel the remaining 3 units, A can travel 1 unit, B can travel 1 unit, C can travel 1 unit. It gives me the remaining 3 units, and I'm going to end up at a point +4. So the maximum value I can get for all of these mods is +4. So I know the distance has to be less than 4 units. The same way I'm going to take in the reverse case. Again, A, B, and C. Now let me make C travel towards B first. If C travels towards B, the distance C travels is 3 units, and now B and C are at B's house. Now B and C both together are going to travel this 1 unit. So the total distance traveled is going to be 2 units. So the distance traveled by both C and B to A's house is a total of 5 units. And I need the distance to be less than 10 units. So I'm going to calculate for equal to 10. So all three of them now have to travel a distance of 5 units. That's the 5 unit remaining, right? 3 units is traveled by C to B, and both C and B travel to A in 2 units. So the remaining 5 units has to be traveled by all three of them. So the remaining 5 units has to be traveled by all three of them. Each of them is going to travel a distance of 5 by 3 units. So I'm going to take 5 by 3 is 1.66. I'm going to travel a distance of 1.66 from -1, which gives me -2.66. So I know this is the endpoint and this is going to be the endpoint. And since I need the distance to be less than 10, the range for the distance is going to be from -2.66 to less than 4. The range has to be between -2.66 and 4. So all the integer values between -2.66 and 4 are going to be -1, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. That gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the answer here has to be delta. So what I'm doing basically, whenever I have a question where 2 moduli are added to each other, right? I'm just thinking about the distance that they're going to travel on the number line. So when I take the individual distances, I'm going to take the distance between the 2 points on the number line. But when A goes to B's house, I know that 2 people are now going to travel to C's house, right? So the distance they're going to travel is going to be double, because if B travels 3 units to C's house, even A is going to travel 3 units to C's house, right? So this is going to be 6. So if I tell you the total distance here is 7, the remaining distance has to be 3 units that need to be traveled, and this time that 3 units is going to be traveled by all 3, A, B, and C, moving towards the right. And if all 3 of them have to travel 3 units, then I know that each of them has to travel 1 unit. So the answer here should be 6. Algebraic way, Jomon, is this procedure, okay? So the algebraic way of solving, right, is when you place the roots on the number line, you get the roots at -1, 0, and +3, right? So the algebraic way of solving is to take conditions of the modulus in this 1, 2, 3, 4 regions, and then split open the modulus and solve. So if I take the conditions of the modulus in this region, right, which is to the right of +3, right of 0, and the right of -1, all the outputs of the modulus are going to be positive. So here it would be x minus 3 plus x plus 1 plus x is less than 10. So x plus x is 3x. 3x minus 2 is less than 10. So 3x is going to be less than 12. X is going to be less than 4. That would be one solution. The second would be when I take in the second region, it's to the right of 0, to the right of -1, but it's to the left of +3. So the output of this first mod is going to be negative. The output of the next 2 mods are going to be positive. So minus x plus 3 plus x plus 1 plus x is less than 10. So I need to keep on doing all of this for the 4 regions and then find out what the value of x is going to be. That's going to take me a little more time. Yeah, you'll need the intersection of all the solutions. That's why I'm saying the distance of plugging would be a much easier way to work this out. Got it? See what I'm ideally saying, guys, for those who are new to this, right? What I'm ideally saying here, you'll need to know what modulus is first. Okay, let's take another example. If I give you mod of x plus 2 plus mod of x plus x minus 3 is equal to, let's take equal to and solve it so that you can understand it better, is equal to 10. Now the meaning of this is the distance that x travels from -2 and x travels from -3 has to be total to 10. So the critical points here are going to be at -2 and +3. So just imagine that you have 2 friends, A and B, at those 2 points, and they both have to travel a distance of 10 units, exactly 10 units. Now the first condition is when A travels to B's house. If A travels to B's house, the distance A has traveled is 5 units, right? The distance A has traveled is 5 units. I know the remaining distance that needs to be covered is going to be 5 units. But this remaining 5 units is going to be covered by both A and B, right? Because now A is at B's house, both of them can travel. So if both of them have to travel the remaining 5 units, each of them can travel 2.5 units. So +3 plus 2.5 gives me 5.5. And if you take this 5.5 and plug it into the solution here, it will definitely solve. 5.5 plus 2, 5.5 minus 3. 5.5 plus 2 is 7.5. 5.5 minus 3 is 2.5, gives you the solution to be equal to 10. The second case, -2 plus 3. This is A, this is B. B travels to A, that would be 5 units again. Now the remaining 5 units has to be traveled by both A and B, right? So each one travels 2.5 units. So if from 2, if I travel 2.5 units, I'm going to get -4.5. So the other solution to this equation is x is equal to -4.5. You put in -4.5 here, -4.5 plus 2 plus is mod of 2 minus 2.5, which is plus 2.5. And -4.5 minus 3 is -7.5. Mod of -7.5 is 7.5, right? So 2.5 plus 7.5 gives me 10. So that would be the solutions to this addition of 2 mods. Okay, that's how you work it out. So what I'm doing here is instead of 2 people traveling, I'm taking 3 people traveling, and there's an inequality involved. So I need to find out the range between the 2, right? Because the range will be anything in between the extremes. Okay with this, guys? So this is a new concept, right? I rarely do it. But since there was a question that somebody asked me, I brought this question into the webinar to just show you how you work with distances on the number line. Okay with this, guys, all of you all? Perfect. Okay, guys, last call for some questions. Jomon, yes, the one I gave you just now, right? Mod of x plus 2 plus mod of x minus 3 is equal to 5. That's an official question. I've definitely seen it in one of the GMAT prep test pack 2 software. Okay. Okay. Sankalp, if you ask me very generic questions like, please give me some tips how to study, it's a very vague question to ask me, right? If you ask me specific questions, I can give you specific answers. See, Ria, if your basics are not in place, right, then it makes sense to start things from scratch. So my advice would be you can definitely use the foundations of GMAT Quant from Manhattan GMAT. Okay. Manu, the level of this question is definitely in the 700 ranges, right? So Ria, the foundation of GMAT Quant from Manhattan GMAT would help you out. Even this book from PDF book from Jeff Sackman will also help you out, because what Jeff Sackman does is he segregates all the questions into topics, so you can pick and choose the topics you're weak at. Arun Sharma is more towards CAT, Ria. So, I mean, maximum you can go up to there is level 2, level 3. Like I said, right? Like I said, right? The GMAT is more of test of reasoning. It's not a test of, strategies and math. It's Jeff Sackman. Okay. I think you can find this online somewhere. Okay. You can make use of this. Guys, any other questions that you have for me before we wrap up the session? Right, I see the reason why I picked this topic as a topic for a webinar. Normally I do a lot of concept based webinars, is because lots of students have approached me in the past 2-3 weeks, asking me about the new format, asking me how many questions you should get right or wrong for a 51 or a 50. So I just wanted to clarify all of that, and I wanted to clarify with some amount of data, and that's why I took up all those ESRs and told you that you can only make mistakes in 2 questions and 4 questions for you to get a 50 or a 51. All right. And I also wanted to keep the session in terms of a take back by giving you some take back in terms of strategy, rather than keeping it to be a very generic session. Right. So that is why I included these questions also, in addition to what feedback we've got from the 51 scorers. Right. So I tried to justify their feedback with a question. All right. Okay, guys, any other question? Any last questions for me? What should be the strategy for quant preparation, the approach? I have that answer for you in my next slide. Okay. This is what I would suggest. And this is what I would suggest to everybody, right? It's imperative that you learn the underlying concept, learn the GMAT specific strategies related to the topic. For example, mixtures was one thing you learned today, specific to weighted averages. You need to practice a lot of questions related to that one topic, okay? Because if the problem with the official guide and the quant review is they don't give you the questions segregated into topics, right? So if you're weak in a particular topic, it's better for you to use a resource which gives you all those questions under one chapter and then try to solve them. Okay. For people who are in the last phase of prep, guys, you'll need to focus on the problem areas. The normal problem areas would be permutations, combinations, probability, inequalities, and absolute values. For some, it would be number systems. So make sure you work with those questions. For those who have given a practice test and are scoring somewhere in the range of 49, my advice to you is, if you have the time, please go through the advanced documents that we've had, that we've provided you with. And I would also recommend the advanced GMAT Quant from Manhattan GMAT. Okay, very, very, very good set of questions. All of them, I would say, varying from a range of 650 to 800 levels. Very good questions, and this is only recommended to people who have scored a couple of 49s on their practice test. If you don't have not scored a 49, you're somewhere in the range of 44, 45. It is not a problem with getting the 49, 50 level questions wrong. It's a problem that you've answered more easy and medium questions wrong. So your focus should be on getting those concepts fixed. I gave you a resource, Jomon. I would definitely recommend the Advanced GMAT Quant from MGMAT. You can download the PDF. Shikhar, we have students who have come with the feedback to us saying they've got 3 probability questions. We've had students who come back to us saying they've got 0 probability questions. So it really depends upon the computer throwing those questions at you or not on test day. Nidhi, the questions will help you out, right? But you don't need to go towards level 4 and level 5s. Like I said, right? You're not going to have data sufficiency tested in depth there. So it may help you with your concepts, but you'll need to know where to stop at a point. See, I know what you're dealing with. I prepared for the CAT myself. So I'm telling you from experience, you don't need to, use CAT material to solve that. Yeah, I think level 2 and level 3 will be okay. You can stop at that point. Yes, Ria, Total GMAT Math by Jeff Sackman. So you can maybe send in a mail to prep if you want, and I can send you that Dropbox link. You don't need to download it. Okay. Guys, see one thing I've noticed, right? One thing I've noticed is most of y'all in the chat bar, right, have asked me what is the level of this question and so on. See, on test day, right, you can't go by what level of question occurs. You don't know. You can't analyze whether that question is going to be at a higher level or lower level. All right. So be a little just think about it a little carefully. Don't worry about the question types, please. All right. Don't worry about the question types and what level. Just go with the flow of the question. Right? Don't critically analyze in the question types, please. Most of you all are asking me the question again and again. What is the level of the question? I don't think you should focus on that. Oh, thank you, Nidhi. Thank you so much. All right, guys. Any last questions before I shut shop? It's almost 9:45, so we've exceeded by 45 minutes. All right, guys. So then I'll see you in 3 weeks' time. I think you're going to have a verbal webinar before that. So we're going to have webinars like this, on a very regular basis from now on. And each of the webinars will have a take back. All right. So I'll see you guys in 3 weeks' time. You can have a verbal webinar before that. So adios. Good night. See you.